Good morning, everyone. First of all, thanks for joining me this morning. Looking forward to spending the next hour or so going through some mapping stuff here in Power BI. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Chris Silvernail. I'm a senior BI consultant at 3Cloud. I currently live in Oklahoma in a city named Edmond. It's just north of Oklahoma City, which is in the middle of Oklahoma, home to the Oklahoma City Thunder. I've been married for over 20 years. Me and my wife have 4 kids. My youngest is a daughter who's 6, and my oldest is my 18-year-old son who's just now a freshman in college. Hobbies, I like to listen to and play music, and I'm also into photography and videography. Spend a lot of time taking pictures of my kids just to kind of capture those special moments. So I've been in the industry for about 20 years. The first 15 years of my career, I was a software developer, mainly doing like desktop application, web application, and like J2EE application stuff, some integration development in Java and C# mainly. And for the last 5 years, I've kind of been in the data BI space. And then, you know, most of that time has been spent primarily in Power BI. I've got some experience in Spotfire, et cetera, also. So since I've lived in Oklahoma and spent most of my career in Oklahoma, I've worked mainly in the oil and gas industry. So today, I'm going to be covering the 4 main map types that are built into Power BI. I'm going to go over the map and the field map, which are based around the Bing maps. And then I'm also going to show the shape map and the newly introduced Azure map. The shape map and Azure maps are still in preview, so just be aware of that. And I'm going to walk through real quick how to enable those in the Power BI desktop client. So the things that I won't be diving into in this presentation, I'm sorry if you came here with these expectations, but I just wanted to lay this out up front. I'm not going to go into any detail regarding the mapping coordinate systems as far as the different, you know, geodetic systems, et cetera. So there's a lot to learn on that. And I, you know, recommend you spend some time doing that if you're going to be doing any mapping, but a lot of that gets pretty heady. So I'm also not going to be covering the ArcGIS map visual. Those of you that have access to an ArcGIS online account, you know, that's a pretty powerful tool, and I would suggest looking at that as well, or any of the third-party mapping visuals. There's some stuff out there in the marketplace. Yeah, those things are all very valuable, but I'm not going to go into that today. So everything I'm going to be showing you is available in the free version of Power BI. So everything that you see, you should be able to use without needing premium licensing or anything like that. There are some features that I'm going to show at the very end that might require an account with a third party, but we'll get into more detail on that. Let me go ahead and bring up my pre-baked analysis that I've got here. So I've got this kind of set up already. Let me see if I can get this out of my way. Okay. All right, so I've got an analysis already set up, and I've got 3 data sets imported. I'm not going to go into the detail of how I imported that data. Let me go ahead and show it to you, though, so you can kind of see the shape of the data that I have. So this course, really, I'm going to assume that you're familiar with Power BI, and you've used Power BI to do analysis already, and you just want maybe some help getting started or some more information on using the mapping visuals. If you're like me, when you first got into Power BI, the fact that there's 4 different mapping visuals is a little intimidating, and it's like, where do I begin? And a lot of that, you know, I just dive in and played with. So maybe, hopefully today, by me walking through some of this stuff, I can give you a head start. Okay, so the first data set I have is a UFO sightings. You can see it's by date and time, city, state, county, UFO shape, length of encounter, has a description, and a latitude and longitude. These are some important things, probably 2 of the most important fields that we're going to be talking about today. I also have a list of well sites that are in Oklahoma. And then the final one I have is a US population by county. So this is across state and counties. It's just the population of the year 2010. So these are some pretty simple data sets. Again, I'm not going to go into data prep within Power BI, but this stuff, so I got this data set from Kaggle, and this one is one I got from the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, and this one I got from the Census. So all this stuff's freely available online, and I have some links to that in the presentation that I'm going through, that I'm showing you my PowerPoint. It's also going to be mailed out after the presentation, so you'll have a copy of that as well. So without further ado, let's get back to the analysis. So the first thing that we want to do whenever we're dealing with data is to make sure that we have our data categorized correctly, especially when we're dealing with any of the visuals that rely on Bing Maps, because that's basically going to tell Power BI what your intention is with that piece of data. So like the county, you can go up here to the column tools and just make sure you have it categorized as county, state. Yeah, same thing here, state or province, and then latitude or longitude. You notice we have those categorized. So one other thing I want to talk about, I assume most of you are familiar with latitude and longitude. If not, quick breakdown. It's basically just a coordinate system for placing things on the Earth. So there's different ways to do that as far as, so it's a decimal number, and there's different systems for how those decimals map to things on Earth. So the Earth itself isn't a perfect sphere. So we can assume it's a perfect sphere for a lot of the things that we're doing. And so sometimes you have to be very specific down to less than a meter. And so there's different projections and stuff like that for the Earth that take into, or I'm sorry, there's different datums for the Earth that take into account like differences in elevation and all that kind of stuff. And the fact that, anyway, so just know that with Power BI, if you want pixel perfect, matching, it needs to be in WGS84. If not, you might see some datum shift between your points and how they appear on the map. So if you can get your data in that format, that's ideal. If not, you'll just notice some things are off. For a lot of the stuff that you do, it's not that critical, but for some things, if your use case, just be aware of that. So I did have this lat long accuracy. I wanted to show this just to show you, like we talked about it being a decimal number. So the number of decimals, will affect the precision. So this is a cool little diagram that just shows, as you move out to the decimal places, you get more and more specific. So if you have it down to 3 decimal places, you can get close to the neighborhood or street. 4, you're starting to get into the individual street. And if you get out to 5, you're doing pretty good. So for most of the stuff we do, that's good enough. If you're just trying to see where buildings are located in reference to one another, et cetera. So anyway, that's my quick high level on latitude, longitude. Okay, so we have our data here for well sites, which is what we're going to start out with. Let's go ahead and pop out a map control. Okay, and let's add the latitude and longitude. Okay, and for size, let's go ahead and use BBLs, which is basically barrels of production. So one thing we see immediately, and this is a great example of what mapping can do for us. So immediately it reveals something, that we weren't expecting, right? These are wells that are in Oklahoma. So we can see here we have one out in the middle of the ocean and one here in China. So if we look at all the ones that are located within Oklahoma, the latitude and longitude, the latitude's 34 and the longitude's a negative value. If we come out here to the one in the middle of the ocean, we see that the latitude and longitude is 0. So there we have a data quality issue. Over here in China, we can see the same thing. The longitude is a positive number. So my guess is that they just didn't negate that value. So that should be a negative 95 and a negative 97. But for our case, we're just going to go ahead and filter those out so that we can get them off of our map. So let's take our longitude out here and we'll just create a slicer real quick for this. And I only want to show ones that are negative. So let me go ahead and start that at 0. Okay, and let's get rid of the one that's in the ocean as well. So let's just drag this in a little bit. That ought to be good enough. Okay, great. So here we are. So another thing I want to point out, now that we have some of our data points out here on the screen, is this eye up here in the right-hand corner. You need to look out for this. Too many values, not showing all data, click to see details. Essentially, this control is limited to 3,500 data points. So you need to know that. That eye, I mean, it's unfortunate that it's so small, but hopefully that will help explain why sometimes you may not see all the data. So I'm going to go ahead and add another slicer here. I'm going to pull in operator, just so we can get this down to a smaller data set to work with for demonstration purposes. And let me go ahead and turn that into a slicer. And let's just go ahead and lump this down to Sandridge. Okay, now we have a little bit better data set to deal with. So as you can see here, we've got some some interesting information coming in. So we have the latitude and longitude, we have the location, and we also have the barrels. Let's go ahead and add the well name to our tooltip. Okay, so now we have, okay, cool. We can see our individual wells that are out here. These all look like they're saltwater disposal. Okay, so when you're dealing with exact points on the map, let's go here and into the properties, and in the bubbles, it's what's used to show those on the map. So this is, as we zoom in here, this has got one parameter here, which is just the size, and we can basically make this larger or smaller depending on what works for our use case. So let's go ahead and make those a little bit smaller. And it's looking a little bit better there. Okay, and one other thing that I want to point out that's cool about this map is you can actually, so we're showing it by size, right? So we have another option here, and that's the data colors. So we can actually show either a gradient for the size, or we can bring in a different measure if we wanted to also. For example, let's go ahead and go into this conditional formatting. And let's change this to BBLs, which is barrels, okay? And we'll do yellow to blue. Okay, so that is using the size and the color. So it's showing the same information. It does help us see a little bit better than maybe the shapes, because the shapes don't have a lot of, it's hard to differentiate maybe the volumes based on just the size because they're so close. But what I wanted to show you is that you can also use, you know, a different measure in here. So let's go in here and go to well site, and let's do age. Okay, and so now we can show two different measures in a single map control. So we have our volumes of production in the size, and then we have age and color. So this is cool. It shows us that this one out here in Velma is pretty old. Let's go ahead and see how old that one is just for fun. So that's 12,863 days old. So that's great. All right, so now let's talk about the Bing layers. So the map style here, right now we're set to road. So on this map and on the field map, which are both based on Bing Maps, you have the same themes, you have the same basically surface layers that you can map on top of. So here we have the aerial, and this is pretty cool. Let's just go ahead and we'll drill all the way down into it. And as you can see, these are lining up pretty nicely with our well sites. All right. And so now let's go ahead and do something else. So let's add some data here. We're going to add a table, and then we'll add our well name. Just want to demonstrate that this works like any other control, you know, any other visual in Power BI. You know, it's automatically connected. So as we click down through here, it'll automatically jump us to the location. So that's pretty convenient. And it auto zooms. So anyway, pretty cool. Let's go ahead and delete that. So now I want to show you something. Let's go ahead and move this. Let me get rid of this slicer, and I'm going to create a filter here for operator instead. And that's a lot. I do want to limit it down some, but I want to. Okay, and in order to make this a little bit easier to see, let's go back in here. Let's turn off our data colors. And let's add our operator to our legend. Okay, so that is one thing to note. If you're using the gradient of the color to show another measure, you're not going to be able to color code the dots on your map based on a legend. So you have to kind of pick one or the other. So that's good to know. So let's look at what this tells us about our data. We can see that Sand Ridge is up here in the north. And again, don't take anything that you're seeing here as good data. This is just a small data set that was pulled and massaged and everything else. So please don't, this is public data, but don't assume that this, Sand Ridge only operates in this area, anything like that. So, okay, so we have Sand Ridge up north, with Mid-Con here in the mid, with some overlap with White Star and Citation down here in the south. So it's pretty cool. Immediately we can see, I'm going to assume this is data that you're interested in looking at. What this tells us that we would never know by just looking at data is that in these areas, Citation and White Star have a lot of overlap. So imagine you're White Star Petroleum and you're looking for a company to purchase so that you can get the economies of scale or whatever that they talk about. So this immediately shows you things that are within the same vicinity as assets that you already own. So okay, so that's using this map to lay out assets using latitude and longitude. So you notice that there's also a location. So let's go ahead and get rid of the latitude and longitude for now. And let's just drag our state up here into our location. So what that did, since we have an operator defined, is it drew a pie chart in the middle of Oklahoma. Okay, that is not real compelling to me. I don't know how valuable that is. That's pretty ugly. Maybe if you had multiple states, or let's, for just example, let's go in here and let's drop in county. Maybe that's more meaningful. If you have multiple states involved or multiple regions that you want to look at. Still, that leaves a lot to be desired, and I think that's going to help us kind of segue into our next map type. But before we do that, I do want to point out something that maybe you noticed. As soon as I drop county in there, we know that all of our wells are in Oklahoma, so why is it dropping these out in different counties? So the simple answer to that is those counties exist in other states as well. So Bing only knows right now the county. So we don't have the state information associated with that. So what you can do here on this map, since you have the county, let's go ahead and add the state into our hierarchy. Okay, so now we have a state and county hierarchy. If we drill into that state, okay, now you can see that based on this hierarchy, that it knows to place everything within that state. Okay, let's go ahead and drill up. So instead of drilling into the hierarchy, let's click down and go into our next level of the hierarchy. Okay, so here we are again with counties throughout different states. So I wanted to point out the way that this works. This is sometimes a source of confusion for users. So whenever you click this button, it ignores the first level of the hierarchy and it only sends county to Bing Maps. If you click this button, it sends the full hierarchy. So you can educate your users on how to do that, or you can put in a simple fix. What I have here, let me just go ahead and go over to my data and show it to you. I've created a calculated column that includes the state, comma, county. And now whenever users click that button, it sends all that information to Bing, regardless of which button they use. Okay, so that's kind of a way to foolproof it against your users, so to speak. Okay, the last thing I wanted to show on here was, let's go ahead and switch back to latitude and longitude. Okay, let me explain that error real quick. As soon as you drop in a location, it's going to use the location to lay it out on the map, and the latitude and longitude are basically helpers at that point to help place things more specifically on the map. I'll get into that with the next map type, but just know that if you see that error message, that you just need to go into your latitude and longitude and select back to don't summarize. And that will use the actual location for each one of those elements on the map. Okay, so let's go back over here. And I want to show you, in addition to the bubbles, there's also a heat map. Okay, and it's not showing up right now, and that's because I have an operator here in my legend. So the heat map works very similar to the gradient. So you cannot have a heat map and a legend specified at the same time. So if you get in here and your heat map's missing, you have a legend. Go remove it. So let's go ahead and turn this on. And you can see what a heat map does. It's pretty obvious. You've probably seen this a lot lately in all the COVID-19 maps and stuff you're looking at. So it basically just creates a blurry bubble, essentially. Okay, very nice. And of course, since we're dealing with heat maps, we want to make it look like heat, right? Pretty cool. Now it looks hot. All right. So moving on, that in a nutshell is the map. That's known as the map visual, based on being in the slide. I've kind of got an overview so you can revisit that. I've created this here just kind of as a cheat sheet to show you the icon to use for whichever map. And that continues on through here. So that's the icon you want for this Bing map. Good overview there. Okay, so let's move on to the filled map. Okay, I'm just going to delete this map off my canvas and reuse the same one in the interest of time. And let's go ahead and drop a filled map down on our page. Make it big. Okay, so a filled map is different. So a filled map, the idea is that you're wanting to show values and how they proportionally relate to other regions. So think about like socioeconomic data or something like that. If you're looking at population, if you're looking at birth rates, if you're looking at, I don't know, poverty rates, salary information, education, anything like that. That's kind of the go-to example for what you'd use a filled map for. So let's go ahead and get started. And I'm going to use UFO sightings. Basically just a data set that contains all the sightings or recorded sightings of UFOs. So let's start again with latitude and longitude. Okay, and we have nothing. So again, we have this hidden eye up here. So let's take a look at that. More location data is required to create a filled map. So to create a filled map, the location data should include Bing Map supported geographic data such as county, region, state, or postal code. Okay, so why are the latitude and longitude even here? We'll get back to that here in a second. So for location, let's just go ahead and plug in state and province. Again, if you're not seeing what you expect, make sure that you have your data categorized correctly. State and province, longitude, latitude, county, city. Okay, so here's a shape map. As you can see, you know what? Let's make this a little bit bigger for you guys. Go ahead and drop a filter in here. Let's get rid of Alaska. Okay, hopefully that's a little bit bigger and you guys can see it better. Okay, first thing you'll notice, there's a big hole in Nebraska. Okay, there's no data, no sightings in Nebraska. That's very interesting. So if you're frightened of aliens, I suggest Nebraska as a place to live. Okay, so everything's one color right now. You'll notice here in the fields panel, we don't have a value box. So there's no way to specify how we want to color these shapes. So what that means, so let me show you. If you remember how we set up the color gradient for the bubbles on the last map, that's essentially how you use this shape map. You have to go in here and you have to go to your data colors and you have to use conditional formatting. And you come in here and let's base this on, I do have a length of encounters, but I'm going to do this just on the number of encounters. So an index, each encounter is uniquely identified by this index. So we just want to do a count distinct. And again, let's use yellow and blue. Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. So we can see that Florida and California have the most sightings. Okay, and just to reiterate, these map controls work like any other control in Power BI. So before we do that, let's turn this off. That auto zoom feature is very convenient for certain things, but it can be frustrating whenever you're developing a map. So you can turn that off and then it'll quit moving around on you. Okay, so we'll set this up eventually. Sorry, please bear with me. I know it's painful to watch somebody do something like that. But we can come in here and we can create a line chart, and we'll just do like the date on the axis. And then, oh gosh, values. Multi-count distinct. Let's turn this into a date. Okay, and now we can see the number of encounters that we have across our time axis. And let's go ahead and do the UFO shape up here, and let's turn this into a heat map. Okay, let's make sure that's not using sum. We want count distinct. Okay, so as we can see now, we can click through here and all these things update appropriately just as we expect. We can come over here, and so by state, we can click on California, and we can see that, you know, how these break down. This works like any other visual in Power BI. So you can set, you know, how they interact with one another. If you want to do filtering instead of shading, et cetera, all that stuff works. It's pretty cool. So, so again, the field map, that's really all I'm going to show you on that. It's pretty obvious what it's used for. You know, it's whenever you want to show different regions. And how they relate to one another with a specific value. Okay, again, Bing map, you have the same kind of stuff that you're expecting: aerial, dark, light, grayscale, road, etc. All right, so the one thing to note about this map, so if you notice, we don't have, we can't specify, we can't bring our own shapes to the game. So we have to rely on the shapes that are basically built into this control. So this is great if you live in the United States and you want to see things by state or by county or by zip. This control works pretty well. In a lot of cases, you may have different geographical regions that you want to map, or you might have something that you want to map that's not even based on a globe. That's where our next control comes in. So let's get rid of that shape map. Sorry, let's get rid of the filled map, and let's move on to the shape map. Okay, so just to review real quick. So we have our map. That's the one we use where we wanted to lay out. That's really good when we want to see the exact location of assets on the map. And then we had our filled map, which works when we want to show regions on the map, and we want to use built-in maps that are available and come with Power BI. So now this third one is a shape map. Now this map is in preview, and there's a good reason for that. But let me show you how to turn this on. I assume most of you can get into these settings, but let me go ahead and pull this up. So coming here to preview features, you'll notice there's a shape map. And I also have the Azure Map visual turned on. I'm only going to show you this once. So you basically want to put a check mark in both of those if you want to use those maps. Okay, so the shape map, it does come with some built-in maps, which you can't see until you put data on the map. So let's go ahead and do that. What do we want to use for this one? I guess let's use our US population. Okay, luckily this one does have a color saturation right here. Okay. So here we go. As you can see here, there's no map layers. You lose the Bing layers, so you don't have road, you don't have aerial, you don't have any of that stuff. But we do now have the ability to bring our own shape map. Okay, so let me go ahead and give you a demonstration here. Let me go over here and let's get rid of the shape. And I'm going to load up one that I have prepared for counties. Okay, so here's a county level map of the United States. So let's talk about what I just did there. So right here, I've got a county map that's called County FIPS Topo Simple. So these custom shape maps are in a format that's called TopoJSON. And let me come in here. Let me show you one of these files, for those of you that may not be familiar. It's essentially just a text file that has the coordinates that define the shapes. And how to, it basically tells Power BI how to draw these shapes on this canvas. So let's come back over here. And let's go ahead and drop our county in here and see what happens. Okay, it did something, but that's not really what I expected, right? It's still, I'm guessing that it laid out those values correctly based on the state, but I really wanted to see it at the county level. So let's come back over here to this shape and let's open up the view map keys. So within our file, in addition to all of these numbers, there's other attributes that are embedded. And boy, that is taking a while to come up. Okay. And those will show up here in these map keys. And essentially, if you want these pieces of data to map correctly, you need to be able to uniquely tie them, each one of your records, to a, each column basically to a shape. So here we have FIPS. And FIPS, that's a, I'm trying to remember what that stands for, Federal Information Processing Standard. So I got this information from census.gov. So it had this baked in already, which is convenient because this map also has those FIPS keys baked in as attributes. So if I come back over here and I change county to FIPS, now it's doing a one-to-one mapping. And this map's in preview, and that should, let me talk about that for a bit. And probably the main reason that this is in preview and will be in preview forever is because of the performance of this map. Depending on how specific the shapes are that you're drawing on this map, I mean, if you think about it, these shapes could take into account individual streets, rivers, anything that's going to break up these districts. And so basically the fidelity of this map could be humongous. And as you can see here, I'm struggling just even to move this thing around on my screen right now. So in light of that, for those of you that have TopoJSON maps, there's a site out here that's called MapShaper.org. So let me back up a bit, first of all, talking about TopoJSON. So if you have a map that's not in TopoJSON format, like a lot of places will have ArcGIS and you'll have shape files. So if you want to import that shape file into Power BI, come in here to mapshaper.org. You can import it and convert it to TopoJSON. The other really powerful feature of this little online utility is you can simplify your map. So depending on your needs and how much performance versus how much fidelity you need in your map, you can come out here and you can slide. And this is not working. Oh, yeah, it is. As you can see, as I slide it, my shapes get less and less specific, and they get more and more specific. So you can come out here and kind of toy around and kind of find the sweet spot for where you want your maps to be. Okay, so that's the population by FIPS. And that is the shape map. One other thing I want to point out, this one does not support hierarchical drill down. So what I typically use these for, let me go ahead and change this back. US, state. So you notice these aren't classified, but it doesn't really matter because this is using map keys. So I don't even need to categorize it as state. So what I like to do with these is create two maps for my drill down functionality. So you can either put them both on the same page, but I like to put them in a tooltip. So I've got a map tooltip already kind of created over here where I have my county map loaded up and I have it with set up for population. And then over here, I just set this up as a tooltip. One other thing, make sure on your tooltip, boy, that is painfully slow. I'm wondering if the Zoom meeting is interfering with. Make sure you have auto zoom turned on. What that'll do, whenever you highlight over here in your map, Texas, for example, it's going to automatically zoom into Texas. So this is a pretty cool visual. This works well. As you can see, as you slide over, it updates the state to show the county level. All right, so the one other thing I wanted to show you, we talked about geographic maps and shapefiles, but let's talk about something like a seating chart, et cetera. So these maps don't have to be geographic maps. So I've created another sample here, the tennis court map. What I did is I went out to Google Maps and I scrolled in on the park that's down the street from my house that has tennis courts. And from within Google Maps, I drew my own shapes. So I basically laid out 4 polygons on top of the tennis courts. And then I exported that into a text file and then converted it to TopoJSON with that utility that I showed you. And what I've done is I've created this little dummy Edmond Tennis Club court schedule. So if we look, this image here on the left is the one that I created from Google Maps. I just snagged this tennis court picture directly from Google Maps. And I imported my shape map, my tennis courts TopoJSON, custom map. Okay, so now I have a map that I've created that it shows tennis courts. Okay, so I have court 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I can come in here and say if I want to find where Blake Carpenter is at 9 a.m., I may not know where court 3 is, but I know where it is now because it's, it lays out on my map. So this is a real simple example just to kind of show you this, but you can imagine the power that this opens up for you within Power BI. You can create your own map of anything you want and then map your data to that. So think about a seating chart or parking lot assignments, anything like that. You now have the power to display within your Power BI map. So another thing that's cool here, let's go ahead and go in here and let's set up on these colors. Set a count of tennis courts. I already have my gradient set up for the color. So let's do like name. Okay, and now this shows immediately that, tennis court 4 doesn't get much action. So imagine this is something that actually is non-durable. Tennis court maybe is a good example of that. If we want to even out the wear and tear that we're getting on these tennis courts, we could use this when somebody calls in and makes a court reservation, and we can say, you know what, court 1, heavily used, let's avoid it, and let's make court 4 our first priority for people that are making reservations. So anyway, this is just a quick example of the shape map and how you can use a custom map in your own analysis. So let me go ahead and close that back out. And I'm not going to save that for now. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to our last map. So again, just to recap, we have the map based on Bing. It's great for individual assets, laying those out on a map. We have the filled map, which is pretty good and for showing regions and using color gradients to show the relationship of a value between those regions. We also have the Bing maps available, and it supports hierarchical drill down. Okay, and then we have the shape map, which is very similar to the filled map, except we don't have those Bing layers in the background, and it doesn't support hierarchical drill down, but we can bring our own map. So that's pretty cool. Okay, and now let's move to the Azure map. In this map, it's also in preview. It's only been embedded and it's only been available in Power BI for a couple months. Still very preview. I'm very hopeful for the power that this map will bring to Power BI. Right now, compared to some of the other tools that are on the market and everything, the mapping within Power BI is kind of a bare bones. Yes, it's there. It covers a lot of what you needed to do, but there's so much more out there that's just not being leveraged right now in Power BI. And this Azure Map control really, from the ground up, appears to have the ability to implement a lot more of these more powerful features. So anyway, the first thing I want to show, when you drop it out here on the screen, is you're going to get this disclaimer. And basically what it's saying is, since this map does use the TomTom service, it's going to send your Latin long queries to TomTom. So just be aware of that. None of the other data with your queries included, as far as who you are, anything like any of the data attributes, none of that's included. It's simply Latin long that are sent to the third party, but that's what that disclaimer is about. So don't let that scare you. It is good to know, but it's nothing too scary. So, okay, let's get started. Let's go back to the UFO data again. And let's just pull that in here. We're going to do latitude, longitude. And for our size, go ahead and do index. And we want to do count distinct, not sum. Okay. All right, so there's the basic map. Right now, our layers are back. We do have some new ones that are available. But essentially, these are all pretty much self-explanatory. So let me pull up my presentation real quick. I want to talk about one thing in particular. Oh boy. Sorry, please bear with me. So what this map really brings to the table is this idea of layers, and that's a concept that's pretty common in the mapping world. So right now, out of the box, the Azure Map has 5 layers that it supports, or 5 types of layers. So there's a bubble layer, which is what we're looking at. There's the 3D bar chart layer. There's a reference layer, a custom layer, and a real-time traffic layer. So I'm gonna walk through and show you what each one of those is and kind of what it's for. The bubble layer, essentially, it's exactly what we were dealing with on the Bing map. It draws a bubble. If we come in here and look at our bubbles now, you will see, however, we have a lot more options. And these are things that were sorely missed on the traditional Bing map. So the first one being this size scaling method. So this is really cool. A lot of times the data you get will be heavily loaded at either the high end or the low end. So let's take UFO sightings, for example. If 95% of our sightings are between 9 minutes and 10 minutes long, and we have the other 5% spread out in the 1 to 8 minute range, whenever we go and we color these, or we make the bubble size based on that length of the engagement, since all that data is clustered there at the end, we're not really going to be able to see the differentiation, or whatever that word is, in our data. Most of it's going to show up as the same color because most of it exists between 9 and 10. So what we can do is we can change that scale to a log. And what that will do is it will really bring out and separate that data that may be clustered together at the high end. And we can even adjust our log scale here. And it even goes one beyond that. If you really want to get into the craziness of it, you can go and create a cubic Bezier curve. So let me go back over here. I'll use a website to kind of explain how this works. So you see it takes 4 parameters. And there's a cool site out here, cubicbezier.com, that lets you come in here and it lets you define a curve. So let's say your data is laid out in an S curve. So a lot of it's at the bottom or the top or whatever. You can come out here and you can define your own curve for how it's going to size those bubbles. And then you can come in here and just take these values, copy and paste them back here into Power BI. And what this does, it basically distributes the size or the color gradient more evenly based on your data set. So that is really cool and very powerful. High contrast outline, blah, blah, blah. A lot of this stuff's self-explanatory, and you can come in here, and then we have blur. If you want to kind of get into creating that sort of heat map style map that we were talking about earlier. One other thing to show you, this is kind of cool. This map has a pitch alignment. So right now it's set to viewport. So what that means, let me get rid of this blur so it's a little bit easier to see what we're dealing with here. So this map renders three-dimensionally. So I can right-click with my right button and I can lay this map down flat like this. So this is kind of cool. And if you do that, you notice that the bubbles look like they're kind of stuck to our viewport, right? So like the lens of the camera instead of down on the surface of the globe. So if we change this from viewport to map, as you tilt that, you see that it kind of lays down with the globe. So that's pretty cool. This is neat. I mean, it's a lot more visually appealing in my opinion than, you know, a traditional map. You can give it a slight curve, et cetera, and do all kinds of cool stuff. So let's reset that real quick. Okay, so that's the bubble layer. So imagine now, since we have a 3D map, we want to make it a little bit more interesting. So let's turn on the bar chart. Okay, that's pretty cool, right? So what that does basically is it just laid everything out as a bar that you can rotate around everything. Same thing, okay, so we have a box or a cylinder, depending on how you want to create your 3D volume, shape, height. All these are pretty much self-explanatory. Spinning her around, oh, left click to move, right click to spin. Okay, again, so that's bar chart. You know, I'm excited to see these bar shapes. It'd be cool if we could bring our own. So hopefully that's something they're working on. But anyway, regardless, right now you can see, even though they're only showing a cylinder or a box, you know, there's some capabilities here that are pretty exciting. Okay, let's change this back to bubble just to make it easier to see some of the other stuff that we're going to be showing off. And again, let's go to our map settings and turn that auto zoom off. And let's get in here and let's kind of zoom in here down to Florida. Okay, so let's talk about a reference layer. So a reference layer, if you have an ArcGIS system or whatever, that you have a bunch of shapes that you have already defined, you can export it from your system and import it in as a reference layer. So this is very similar to the topo.json, but the topo.json wasn't really geography bound. So there's another format that's called Geojson that is geography bound. And I've got a sample here that I've created just to kind of show you how this works. So I've got Oklahoma and Florida. So I have the shapes for Oklahoma and the shape for Florida in a file. And what it's doing is it's taking those shapes that I have defined in that file and it's applying them as a reference layer. So this is cool. It allows you to, so if you think about, if you had like, from the oil and gas background that I'm coming from, like if you had a midstream company and you wanted to show all the pipelines, you had all those shapes defined in a system already, and you wanted to come in and show them on this map, then you'd be able to pull these in and export it as a reference layer and bring it in and import it and show all that stuff overlaid on your map. So this reference layer is fixed. So I was able to set the color to red and green by embedding those in as an attribute into the underlying data. But right now, Power BI doesn't do that dynamically. So you need to have some other sort of data prep pipeline that published that file to a place with those colors already baked in, et cetera. So before you could bring it into a reference layer. But anyway, that lets you bring in your own custom layer. The next one is the traffic layer. So this one actually interfaces with the Azure Maps backend to pull in traffic information. So as you can see, as we zoom in, we can see traffic. So a use case for this that I can think of that's pretty obvious, I was working for a retail chain, and just think about if you're trying to find a place to place a new location. You could actually bring in all your locations like in Oklahoma City onto a map and look where they're located compared to high traffic flow. Anywhere that it's red and you don't have a store, maybe that's a good target location. But that's the traffic layer in a nutshell. It basically just interfaces with Azure on the back end and pulls in real-time traffic information. Okay, and the last one is the tile layer. So what this does is this basically leverages a third-party service that generates tiles, and tiles are basically just images. And I have some set up here. Let's look at this Pioneer one real quick. Let me plug that in. And what that does is it brings in tiles that make the map look like an Old West style map. So what that did basically was it went out and made a call out to this tile layer, and it sent a zoom factor, an X and a Y coordinate. And based on that, this service returns an image that the Azure map overlays as another layer into the map that you're looking at. So let's set this transparency down. Okay, and so now we can see our data points and everything coming through. So there's a service out there for Azure Weather, and I don't have time to walk you through how you set all that up right now, but basically, if you go out, if you have an MSDN account or anything like that, you can go out and set up an account to create an Azure Maps account. And what that does is it lets you interface with that service. And as you can see, it brings in real-time weather information as a tile on top of that. So that's pretty cool. So what that does basically is makes a call out to this backend service in Azure Maps. It says, hey, give me the image that represents, you know, the precipitation or whatever in this area at the current time, pulls back that tile and lays it on top of the map. All right, so that in a nutshell is the Azure Map. As you can see, there's not a lot of functionality here right now. It does have some cool, compelling features, but it's really exciting what some of the custom reference layers and tile layers and some of the other stuff sets up for the future for this control. So just to recap, so I covered these 4 maps: the map, the filled map, the shape map, and the Azure Map. And here in this are some links to some of the stuff that I used today. So if you want to follow up and do any of this on your own, there's actually even a spinal map, which formats the map to do some heavy metal look and feel. So that's nice. So wrapping up, we've got about 5 minutes left, not a lot of time. Are there any questions that anybody has? Okay, Henrik.
Hello.
Hi.
Hoi, hello. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you. You got a question?
I'm from Holland, the Netherlands. Yeah.
Oh.
The weather last you spoke, you need some additional Azure account?
Yes, you do.
And what must we do? What must I do?
Can you see my screen still?
Yes.
Okay, let me log in here real quick, and I'll show you the easy way to do it. You can go in and just search in Azure. Do you have an MSDN account?
An Azure account? Yeah, I have.
With some Azure credit. Okay, it's not free. You are charged per click. It's very cheap. Essentially, they're preventing people from going out. I mean, and you can embed this map, you know, in a commercial product. So all you need to do is go in here and create a resource. And if you just do a search for map, I think it comes up, or do a search for Azure Map, and go into Azure Maps, and you can just click create. And basically, you just create an account, and you can pick your pricing tier. You know, put it in one of your resource groups. This is just a traditional creating a resource out in Azure. Just for fun, do this real quick. Okay. Walk through that process, and then when you go in here, you'll have, essentially, it will give you a key that you can use, that you put at the end of your URL that you specify. I can go ahead and I'll show you my key, and I can go in here and destroy it. But basically, you have a subscription key, and you just append that to the end of the URL, and that basically ties usage to that account in Azure, and it will let you use it. So I've been preparing for this webinar for quite a while, probably for about 2 weeks, and I think I've used about 10 cents worth of Azure credit by pulling in this maps and doing that. So it's not expensive. It would probably get expensive if you had 1,000 people hitting your map every minute. So
yeah. That's I'm just a private person. Yeah, no, very nice. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, let's see, move on. We had a question from Raul. Let me go ahead and unmute you. Oh boy, I'm not very good at this. Okay, Raul, you there?
Yes.
Okay, how's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. How you doing? So
Good.
I noticed on your maps that you're creating, I don't see any actual data labels. Is there an ability to put data labels onto the maps? I
There's
noticed.
not, yeah, the tooltip is really the only thing that I'm aware of right now for labeling data. So again, it's one of those things that's obviously a gap in what's provided there by the maps that are built in.
Mm-hmm. So do you know if any of the third-party tools like Esri or anything provide the ability to do labeling?
I believe the ArcGIS map does. I'm not sure about any other third-party ones. I wish I could point you in the right direction, but I just don't know.
Yeah, I've done it with Synoptic Panel before, but since we're using on-prem, currently we haven't quite gotten to the Power BI service yet. I haven't really experimented heavily with that. So.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Okay. Who else do we have? Okay. It looks like that's it. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Oh, somebody's unmuted still. Is that here? Okay, he's off. I don't know what's happening here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thanks, everyone, for joining. You'll be receiving a link to this presentation, both the recording and the PowerPoint that I used today during the presentation that had some additional information. So thank you very much, everyone. And with that, have a nice day. I appreciate you joining.
Thank you, Chris. And like Chris said, you guys will receive the email link tomorrow in your email box around noon Eastern Standard Time. And if you guys want to view any of our free webinars, you guys can still view those on the Pragmatic Works site under free training. So if you guys have any questions about it, please come out and reach out to me or Chris. We'll be happy to help. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Tuesday. And thank you guys again for joining.